Mark Roche of Le Monde. Don't you have, unlike Afghanistan, that on Iraq, the public opinion has turned the page? We have been lied on, but life goes on. There are economic problems at the moment, and that there isn't the interest for Iraq that there was on Afghanistan this summer.
To whom are you directing the question?
I'll take it. Well, for Afghanistan, we had 14 pages of The Guardian. For Iraq, we have 9. And I suspect that's probably a proportionate view in the United Kingdom's press about the relative importance. But Iraq is now just cool enough, although remember there's still 50,000 US troops there and something like 150,000, 100,000 contractors. Iraq is now cool enough, at least in the public imagination, to properly take a look at it. And that's not something that is yet possible with Afghanistan. We did a little bit of that with the Afghan war log release because it was a primary source documentation, but otherwise views about patriotism and the supporting of troops and so on interferes with the process. For Iraq, I can see already in the news reportage a much fairer and less defensive portrayal of what happened in Iraq that has been revealed by this release. So these two countries do not stand in isolation. These are both modern Western wars. And the lessons of Iraq, which are ongoing, remember this material covers significant abuses occurring during the first year of the Obama administration, can be applied to Afghanistan and can be applied to other places that Western governments may choose in isolation or in coalition to invade. The war itself in the United States, I think, is becoming more of an issue. The Republicans are using the mismanagement of the Afghan war against the Democrats. We're 1 week before the congressional elections. And the Democrats can point to, rightly, the terrible abuses that occurred under a Republican administration. I hope that will permit raising of this issue. But I think in the last 24 hours, the press has been doing precisely what they should, and there's a good and broad spectrum. And you know, the press, when it concentrates on a press issue, can overplay things. But I think their response to this issue has been broad and proportionate, and will continue.
Okay. Back over there behind.
Yeah, Anthony Fiola with the Washington Post. Can you detail the additional steps that you took between the release of the Afghan documents and these documents in terms of redaction, and to make sure that names, et cetera, were not released?
Well, I think that Kristen covered that pretty well, but to make it simple, because it's a fairly long and complex technical process, which I can speak about later to some of you, but not so we don't bore the room. The fundamental principle was to start with everything, every single word and number redacted, and then to wind that back by finding safe words and then modifying the safe words and phrases for the rare accounts where there were dual meanings of words. And that process also involved some of the investigative journalists and researchers consulting with us to give us a feel for what sort of information needed a special care. Although I must say, in that process, the human rights groups were very helpful, and the Bureau of Investigative Journalism was also helpful, but none of the mainstream press partners, in fact, provided any assistance whatsoever to the demands to get 400,000 very serious documents into the public record and into history where they can have ongoing effect. Oh, and if I may add, the Pentagon, of course, refused. Its statement was, we are not interested in a conversation about harm minimization. We are only wanting to hear how the documents will be returned, and the legal counsel for the DoD also issued that statement to us in private correspondence.
Yeah. Right back there, you said? Go ahead.
Enrico Franceschini from La Repubblica Italy. Julian, sometimes you're portrayed like a man on the run. Are you worried about your safety? Do you think that your enemies are trying to hurt you, to get you?
Well, I think that question's been answered a lot in the past. I mean, if you have anything you want to say to it, but.
Well, I mean, I can only sort of get people to consider the words of Daniel Ellsberg, that we have a serious case here where the Obama administration is trying to create new law through changing the interpretation of existing law. In a similar manner to, I suppose, the way in which Bush expanded the power of the presidency using lawyers to create new interpretations of previous arrangements. And that is a serious business. That applies not just to me, but the statements made by the Pentagon are trying to be applied to all press in the United States and outside the United States.
Yeah, right down there in the front. This structure.
Dan Myggen from Computer World. Wednesday, you wrote on your Twitter feed that Wikileaks communications infrastructure was under attack. Do you have any evidence, log files, IP addresses, which could help pinpoint who is making these attacks? And can you elaborate a bit more what this attack was about?
That matter is still being investigated, and I think is perhaps too far removed from the subject of this conference.
Okay, in the very back, in blue.
Julian, back in summer, I had the feeling you said, you wanted the truth to come out, which you still want to, but I have the feeling now that where you said, a lot of wars are started by democracies. You hope that this procedure might stop that happening in the future. So has your aim broadened altogether?
No. We are pursuing the agenda that we have always pursued.
In the red, down there. Hold on, a microphone's coming just to you there. Okay, go ahead.
Hi, Anne McMillan, Canadian Broadcasting. You mentioned that you hope the lessons will be learned from Iraq. What would you say are the main lessons that have come through these 400,000 leaked documents?
Well, it's too early to tell yet. It is the responsibility of the press and the opportunity of the press and human rights groups and legal outfits to, in fact, draw those conclusions. But, I mean, Iraq, as we can see, was a bloodbath on every corner of that country. The stated aims for going into that war of improving the human rights situation, improving the rule of law, did not eventuate. And in terms of raw numbers, of people arbitrarily killed worsened the situation in Iraq.
Yep, right down the front there. Go ahead. Is there a microphone? Right over here. Thanks.
Till Krause from Süddeutsche Zeitung magazine from Munich, Germany. In your press release, you stated that it gives the current leak gives a pretty good account of the war in Iraq without the month May 2004 and March 2009. Why?
We don't know why those months are missing. It's important to remember that this material, while the most comprehensive and detailed report of any war to ever have entered into the public record, is far from complete. It is based upon the statements of US soldiers who are often in a position where they have incentives to lie, such as when they're reporting on their own activities. No one says, I unlawfully killed a civilian, and the right to report about it. It is only material that is of the secret level or below. Events which were subsequently classified as top secret are not present. It doesn't cover US special forces, it doesn't cover the CIA, it doesn't cover the military activities of any other nation in the coalition partnership or the activities of the Iraqi army, except where the regular United States Army interfaces with them. So sometimes the regular US Army will pull security for the CIA, engage in combined operations with the Iraqi army, with US Special Forces, with UK forces. So we get small glimpses through a corner of a window for those organizations involved in the Iraq, which are not the US Army proper. So we do glimpse their activities, but this is not a full account of their activities. It is a pretty full account of the activities of the US Army.
We've got time for one further question. I'll actually pass it over to you, right here. Go ahead. You had your hand up the longest.
Thanks. Mary Mata, Voice of America. This is a question I'm asking anyone on the panel about we, the press. Why do you think it's easier for us to cover things like rape as a tool of war in places like West Africa and other places around the world where it's been widely documented, as opposed to some place like Iraq?
One of the things that we have to face up to, and we see it very clearly in the Bahamas inquiry, is a historic British colonial savagery, if I can put it like that. The techniques that we were using in the Musa incident, hooding, stress positions, food and water deprivation, sleep deprivation, the use of noise. Those all go all the way back to mandated Palestine, through all the colonial wars, Cyprus, Malaya, Aden, Kenya, and into Northern Ireland. And you might think that when Ted Heath banned it in 1972, it stayed banned. No, not at all. If you look at what the British did in Iraq, it's a savagery. These Iraqi men simply did not exist. They had been completely dehumanized. Now, my take is one of the reasons the press are largely silent on all of this is we just don't want to face ourselves. That's my take on the British position and what we did in Iraq. You'd have to ask the Americans for their take. But I think it's important that there's a horrendous racism, and we see it in the British Army, we see it very clearly in the Bahamas inquiry, and I think we can see it very clearly in everything that is going to come out when we get this case heard next month. And again, I invite the British press particularly to pay attention to this case. It's important.
Okay, we actually have one or two more minutes left. There was a hand over here. Okay, go ahead.